Thanks, Ian. So I'm going to give you a brief demonstration, an overview demonstration of ShoeMaker Pro 2013 R1, which is our current customer release version. So before I start, let me just explain the screen layout to you. So across the top of the screen we have our creation entities. I start on the left-hand side where I've got lasts. We then work our way through style lines, shoe pieces, etc., all the way to the end where we have laces, soles, and manufacturing and export. Down the right-hand side I have some standard views that I can use to look at the design and the last from different directions. On the left-hand side I have options, so when I enter one of the creation entities we have options for that creation entity. So if I enter style lines, we have style line options, stitches, we have stitching options, etc. Now at the bottom of the screen we have the library window, which at the moment is showing the last library. Now this library window can be changed to show the different libraries that we have. So I can touch on these buttons at the bottom and open the materials library, stitches library, accessories, etc. So we can choose the library that's displayed at any one time. Okay, so if we start with lasts, so you can see at the bottom I have the last library window open. I could double click on any of these lasts. That would open the lasts, open that particular last for designing upon. Now I've already selected the last I'm going to use, so I'm going to jump forward to the second creation entity, which is style lines, style line curves. So let me start just by clicking the button to create style line curves. My cursor changes to a pencil, indicating that I'm in sketching mode, and now I can sketch points on the last to create my style line curves. Every point I click with the left mouse button is on the last, and I have certain hotkeys I can use, like the one I just used there, which makes a point which is at right angles to the center line. Okay, so I can create style line curves. Now in this case I've deliberately only created the curves on one side of the last. We can go straight across the center line if we want, but here I've created curves on one side because I want to show you that we've got the ability to mirror the style line curves, and I can either do this as a linked operation or as an unlinked operation. So in this case, if I make a linked mirror to get the curves on the opposite side, because this is a linked mirror, if I change the curves on either side, the opposite side will automatically update to keep the two halves synchronized. Okay, so we can create and edit style line curves. Now what I've done there is just deleted the curves I've created because I want to show you another option, which is the ability to import a designer's picture and to use that as a basis for our curve sketching. So what I've done here is I've imported just a JPEG image, and this could have been created using pencils and pens and scanned in. This could have been created using Adobe or Photoshop type tools. It doesn't matter how the sketch is created. We can import it into ShoeMaker, and then I need to do an alignment. So we can rotate and move the last dynamically until we get the last correct, and I can also use the dynamic tools on the edge of the image to change the image. So I can stretch and pull, rotate and mirror the image until I get a good alignment between the image and the last. When I'm happy with my alignment, I can lock the two together, and now if I rotate or move, everything is synchronized and moves together. Now the purpose generally of importing a designer's sketch is to use it as a template for style line curve sketching. So here I'm sketching straight through the designer's sketch onto the last to create my style line curves. And if I rotate this around, you can see exactly what we're doing here. Okay, so let me undraw the designer's sketch, and I'm going to draw the rest of the design lines for this particular design. Now, the design that I'm going to use for the demonstration today is fairly complex in nature. So all of the other style line curves you can see on the screen, I've created these previously and stored them on a level, and I've just turned that level on. So ShoeMaker has lots of levels that can be used for organizing data, which helps a lot, particularly with complex designs. Now the design line we sketched at the front, I need a copy of that, so I'm going to make an unlinked mirror at the front. And I'm just going to zoom in at the end point and just dynamically edit that point to make sure it's in the correct location. For the next element, which is piece creation. Okay, so if we come into piece creation mode, what I can do now is I'm starting to chain together the star line curves that I've created, and you'll notice here the feather edge is automatically added as a star line. Also the center line curve and the back curve are automatically added as star line curves. So here I've given ShoeMaker a closed region, and it's now creating a shoe piece. And there you can see is our first shoe piece created. So let me just turn off the star line curves and turn off the last and zoom in on the shoe piece we've just created, because I want to show you the default properties that we have for shoe pieces. So this particular shoe piece has a default inside, outside and edge material, all of which can be changed. Also it has a default offset from the last and a default thickness, and all of these can be changed. We can double click and use very simple drag and drop tools to change anything about this piece at all. So for instance, if I wanted to change the material, I can simply open the materials library and then drag and drop any of the materials from the library into the background or onto the shoe piece, and the material will update. And we can do that for the inside and the edge as well. Okay, so let me again drop back into shoe piece creation, where again I'm going to start to chain together the regions where I want the shoe piece to be created, and there's our second shoe piece. Now again, in a similar way to star lines, because this is a fairly complex design, the other shoe pieces I need for this design, I've already created them, stored them on a level, and again I've just turned that level on. So there you can see all of the shoe pieces in place. Now, one of the features of ShoeMaker, which is very useful, is the ability to copy properties from one element to another. And I'll show you an example of this right now. So this shoe piece here has a set of properties, and I wish to copy those properties from this shoe piece to the shoe piece we created at the front. So I can hit the Copy Properties button. I have control over the properties that I do copy. So in this case, I'm copying all of them. All the materials, inside, outside and edge. I'm copying the thickness and the offset from the last, from the selected shoe piece to the one we created. I can repeat that operation with the other shoe pieces, like so. So it's a very quick method of copying from one element to another to make sure everything color-coded and matching. Okay, so all of my shoe pieces are complete. So if we move forward to the next creation entity, which is stitching, and I'll open the stitch library. So you can see at the bottom we have a library of stitches which you can add to, but by default you have cross stitching, zigzag stitching, single row, double row, etc. So I'm going to choose single row stitching, and I have a number of different methods I could use for adding stitching to the design. So I could sketch stitching with a cursor, I could use existing star line curves, but in this case I'm going to apply stitching to an existing shoe piece. Okay, so I've picked the shoe piece and I'm now interactively selecting the edges that I wish the stitching to be applied to. ShoeMaker shows me a preview which I can accept, and as soon as we accept that, the stitching is created. Now if I zoom in on the stitching, you'll notice that our stitches are 3D elements. So this is great if you're manufacturing or if you're creating the model for manufacturing purposes like rapid prototyping. It means the stitching come out extremely lifelike. Now again, because this is a fairly complex design, the other stitching for this particular design I had stored on a level, which I've just turned on. And again, I'm now using the Copy Properties button to copy the properties from one of the existing stitch elements to the ones we've just created. Okay, so let's move forward to the next creation element, which is piping. And to show you piping clearly, I'm just going to turn off the display of the shoe pieces momentarily. And I'll open the pipes library and I'll select the page where I have rounds. And again, I can either sketch pipes or I can use existing star line curves to create a pipe. So in this case, I'm going to use the top edge star line curves that we've used for the piece creation to create my piping. And again, I'm going to use Copy Properties to copy the color from the stitching onto the piping that we've just created to color code everything. So in this case, we're using piping to add a rounded edge to the top edge of the design. Okay, so let's move forward to the next creation entity, which is punching. Now, generally speaking, punching tends to be used for creating any line of decorative holes. So here we've actually used some punches to create the lace holes on this particular design. But again, at the bottom on the library window, we have libraries of different punch shapes that we can use, and I have different methods of creating punches. So here I'm going to add some additional punch holes to the design by using the sketch method. Okay, so I'm going to sketch a row of punch holes like so, which we could pick up and move if we wanted to. Okay, so I could adjust the position like so dynamically. Now I'm going to select the punches I've just sketched and come over to the left-hand menu where I have Edit Operations, and in this case I'm just going to change the size. So I'm scrolling the middle mouse rotation button over the increase or decrease size option, and that lets me dynamically change the size of the punch. Now at the moment those punch holes are just geometry that sits on the surface of the shoe piece. So what I can now do is tell ShoeMaker how far I want those punch holes to be punched through the design. So in this case, just through the shoe piece, not all the way through to the last. Okay, and you can see as soon as I select that option, those punches are used to create holes through the shoe piece they sit on. Okay, so those are punches. So let's move forward to the next creation entity, which is accessories. And again, I'll open the accessory library. This is one of the areas of ShoeMaker which is particularly strong, because the accessories that we define and store in our library can have a lot of detail, or they can be very simple. You can choose. So here I've got the eyelets library. We've also got by default lugs. We've got buckles and hooks. But the library I'm going to use here is the loops library. So I'm going to add a loop to this particular design at the back. Before I do that, I'm just going to blank that back shoe piece just to help me with the location of the loop. I can then double click the loop in the library to create a single instance of that particular loop, and then position the origin of the loop like so. Now obviously the orientation of this loop is not correct, so again I can use the dynamic controls. I can scroll the middle mouse over the rotation control to change the orientation of the loop to get it aligned as I need it. Okay, now also I can use copy properties to copy the color, maybe from the piping onto the loop, to make sure that everything is color coded. Okay, so in that particular example I just created a single instance of an accessory, but we can also create chains of accessories as well. Okay, so those are accessories. So let's move forward to the next creation entity, which is laces. Now this is again one of the areas of ShoeMaker which is particularly strong, because we have an automatic lacing routine. So if I hover my cursor over the left-hand lacing option, you can see we've got 6 different lacing techniques that we can choose from. So here I'm going to choose this middle one, which is crisscross lacing. Now as I mentioned, lacing in ShoeMaker is automatic. So all I have to do here is select the elements I want the lacing to pass through. So in this case it's punch holes, but these elements could be accessories like eyelets or loops. There could also be a mixture of accessories and punch holes. So I select the entities I want the laces to be created through, then hit the accept button, and ShoeMaker automatically works out how the laces need to be applied to the design using the elements that were selected. Now again, laces, as with all other elements in ShoeMaker, have default properties. So in this case we have a default material, I have a default cross-sectional shape and cross-sectional size, and I can change any of those elements. So let's say the material, I could come back to the materials page, I could select the laces tab, and I could drag and drop any of the materials from the library onto the design, and that will update the pattern used for the laces. Okay, so automatic lacing, a huge time saver for anybody designing using ShoeMaker Pro. So the final element, creation element I'll show you is soles. Now I already have a fairly complex sole created in this particular design environment. And I've zoomed in on the tread pattern here, so you can see we've got a fairly complex tread pattern applied to this, and I've also got logos on the side and on the bottom of the design. I've got raised panels and channels on this particular sole. So it's a reasonably complex sole with a reasonable amount of detail on it. Now we can use Soul Engineer for creating soles of this nature. However, if you don't want to learn Soul Engineer, we also have some very simple sole creation wizards on the left-hand sole menu. So here I have a simple wizard for creating a sports shoe sole, a simple formal men's sole, a simple ladies pointed heel sole, and ladies square heel sole. So these are all options that you get by default, very easy to use, and they help you create and add a sole to any design. Now in this particular example, we've got a fairly complex sole already created. So what I'm going to do in the demonstration is make some edits to this fairly complex sole. So any of the creation entities in ShoeMaker have an advanced mode. So for soles, if I hit the advanced mode button, that exposes a series of tools that we can use for making advanced changes to the sole. Okay, so again, I've just turned on a level which contains some 2D wireframe geometry that I'm going to use at the back of the sole to create an additional raised panel. So I'm now going to drop into limit mode. I'm going to select the limit operation I want to use and instruct Soul Engineer that I want to keep both elements after the limit operation. Now initially it appears that nothing has happened there, but now if I select the back region of the sole, you can see what we've actually done is split that into two, inside the wireframe geometry and outside. Okay, so at the moment that's the shape is still exactly the same, so we now got to create a raised panel at the back. Now Soul Engineer is a hybrid modeling software package, so that means we're allowed to use any mixture of surfaces, solids and triangles to create our design. So I'm going to convert that surface into a parasolid. So that's now a parasolid model, and that allows me to use solid modeling tools and techniques to affect the design. So here I'm going to use a solid thicken, I'm going to enter a thickness, and I'm going to enter an offset direction, and that's a simple method of creating a raised panel. Now the raised panel I've created here has got a sharp edge that I want to remove, so I can enter a fillet radius value, I can pick the face that I want the fillets to be applied to, and I can hit the apply button and we automatically create an edge fillet which just rounds off that sharp edge, giving the panel a much nicer appearance. The final thing I'll do is again use the copy properties to copy from the white surface to the raised panel at the back. And you can see with just a couple of simple operations we've edited that sole design and created an additional raised panel at the back. Okay, so let me zoom in at the front, and the final thing I'll do to the sole is change this raised panel at the front, and the change I'm going to make here is to apply a texture to that front area, and this will be a 3D texture. So Soul Engineer allows us to have libraries of flat triangle based textures that we can wrap onto any part of our designs, and the wrapping process is performed with a 6-stage wizard which is very simple to use, and it guides the user through the process of wrapping flat triangle texture onto surfaces. So here I've identified the triangle texture that I want to apply to the surface, I've chosen the wrapping method I want to use. ShoeMaker is showing me an image-based preview of how the texture will look on the surface. This gives me the opportunity to affect that wrap. So what I'm doing here is I'm just using the slider bars, in this case to change the size of the texture, just to make sure that the whole of that surface is encompassed, which it is. And then finally I can choose if I want to change the Z height or the trimming that's used when this texture is wrapped on to the surface. And you can see the actual wrap itself is very, very quick. That was a live wrap operation. And the result is a very complex texture wrapped onto a doubly curved region of a shoe sole to give this very nice effect. Now again, if you're making this model for rapid prototyping purposes, all the edges of the triangles are completely closed. So this is will be a closed, watertight, rapid prototyping model. The other thing I would point out here is that to create that complex 3D pattern using surface modeling or solid modeling techniques would take at least hours, probably days. But with the triangle wrapping tools in Soul Engineer, it takes minutes to create flat textures and it takes absolutely seconds to wrap them on. So it's a huge benefit to anybody applying textures to either parts of the upper of the sole or the tread pattern of the sole. Okay, so I'm happy with the design changes I've made to the sole, so I've now accepted those and we've gone back into ShoeMaker mode. Now here the design is fairly finished. However, one thing I'll show you is on the view menu at the top I have a flyout which lets me change between 3D mode, sole bottom flattening and last upper flattening. So if we just drop into last upper flattening mode momentarily, I wanted to show you that all of the lasts in our last library have a 2D flattening stored with them. And that means that any 3D starline curves are automatically flattened to 2D. So without the designers having to make any effort whatsoever, the starline curves are automatically flattened, and they can then be used for exporting to software like Crispin Engineer for pattern development. Okay, so those 2D starline curves can be exported to Crispin Engineer. The whole 3D model could be exported to software like Keyshot for performing rendering of photorealistic images for use in marketing materials or even design approval. The whole 3D design could be exported for rapid prototyping or additive manufacturing purposes. So we can export OBJ with all of the textures intact, and that can be used for rapid prototyping. The other method which is fairly commonly exported from ShoeMaker is the sole can be exported for mold development. So all of the molds can be manufactured from the soles, and also the toolpaths can then be manufactured from those soles. So really the key message from that is that all of the design data that we create in ShoeMaker is all manufacturing ready data. Okay, so that's the end of the software demonstration. So with that, I'll pass you back over to Ian.